Ghostbusters will always be one of my favorite film franchises, regardless of how the new movie ends up turning out. When it comes to the video games based on the series, there's been a few highlights but a lot of lowlights. But there is a brand new game for the PlayStation 4, and it does have some ties to the brand new movie that is coming out in theaters this week. But does the game itself have enough ghost-busting power to make you feel good? Or is it worse than a total protonic reversal? The new Ghostbusters game does take place in the same universe as the brand new film, but it only has minor ties. Mostly the main villain is the same as the film, and there are a few references here and there, but it's very minor. For the most part, the game kind of stands alone on its own. The gameplay is very similar in a lot of ways to Sanctuary of Slime that was released a few years back. It is 4-player with 4 main characters, and you can actually play it 4-player same system co-op, which is rarely seen nowadays, so I definitely appreciate that. The negative, though, is it has no online play. You're unable to play online at all with the game, which seems like a major fault for any game released on a modern system. For the 4 main characters that go nameless, you can actually name them when you end up selecting them at the character select screen, but I don't think actual names are ever given throughout the course of the game. Each of the characters, 2 male and 2 female, have their own different gun from one another, and they all have their own unique grenade or throwable item. You'll have a character with dual pistols that I ended up using most of the time, a Gatling gun guy, a rifle, as well as a shotgun user. So each of the characters does play a bit different from one another, so it's fun to experiment until you find the one that you end up liking the best. The game opens with an animated sequence, which actually isn't too bad. They kind of give you the basics of who the characters are, but you don't really learn too much really about them. You got a few different personality quirks that you learn, but overall, you don't really find out anything about the characters or their backstory or really anything about them. After that, though, there's no more animated cutscenes throughout the rest of the game until you get to the ending of the actual game once you beat the final boss. In between, there are some cutscenes that play out that are just dialogue driven when you're getting the mission briefing for whatever level that you're about to go into. The game contains 6 levels to Ghostbust your way through, with 2 of them only containing 1 level, basically the prologue and the finale, and the 4 stages in between each have 2 levels, and then you actually unlock a bonus remix stage for those 4 particular worlds that you get to go through once you actually complete the main story of the game. When you get into the level itself, it's an isometric view. You control your character with the left stick and aim with the right one, firing with R2, and switching which weapon you're using L1. You can fire out the grenades using L2, and then actually press L2 again to activate them. So once you throw them, you can activate the grenade right away, or wait till it lands and then decide to activate it. When firing your weapon, they actually can overheat, and you have to hit R1 in order to relieve pressure from your weapon, or if it ends up overheating, you just basically can't fire for a few seconds. Besides weaponry, the only thing else you can really do is dodge using the square button to roll your way forward or roll your way backwards, which ends up working as a slowly faster means of travel than the main just walking, as your characters move relatively slow as you start off, but you can also upgrade that. While you're busting ghosts, you'll gain points, which works as the game's experience. At the end of a level, that will rack up, and if you earn enough, you'll level up and gain a few points to then point towards some of your attributes, such as leveling up the amount of health, the power of your weapon, or even the movement of your character's speed. Each of these will cost you 1 point, but a few special ones, like ricocheting the bullets of your weapon, will actually end up costing you 5. You can level up stuff like health and speed up to 5, each costing you 1 point to do so, which I definitely will recommend focusing on certain ones which will help you out, like power as well as your speed. When it comes to taking out the ghosts, most will just be blasted away by firing your weapon, and more powerful special ghosts you'll actually have to catch once you weaken them. You'll weaken them with your main weapon and get out your proton beam, and then you actually have to hook onto them using the right stick to put in the right direction in order to kind of force them and get them more towards ready to go into the trap, and once it fills up, you'll slam them down to the ground, removing a bit of that health. Once you slam them down a few times, you'll then be able to throw out your ghost trap. You can mash the X button for extra bonus points for capturing a ghost, and once the ghost is captured, you can then run up to it, press X, and pick it up, in which case you'll also be rewarded with points based on the times multiplier and the overall difficulty of that said ghost. When it comes to the enemies themselves, most of them are just okay, and you're gonna see the same ones over and over again. I praise that the game actually has so many creatures on screen at once, and for the most part, it doesn't end up chugging, though there is definitely some slowdown here and there, and some even freezing up for a few seconds with the bigger battles that I ended up doing. And because of the sheer amount of ghosts that you're gonna be fighting, you're gonna see the same ones repeatedly. I do like the fact it's kind of like a gauntlet style game with just the sheer amount of creatures going on, but the designs themselves get repetitive. Stuff like possessed books and candelabras and the basic zombie ghoul type ghost you'll be seeing so many times throughout your playthrough. Thankfully, there are some other ghosts that break it up, more powerful ghosts, but even those get repetitive, and a lot of them are palette swaps of other ones, so you'll be seeing the same basic design the farther and farther you end up playing. The only ghosts that really stand out truly are the boss-like ghosts, and these bosses do have different looks to them and different styles, so overall, the bosses are relatively good, but the main enemies end up getting repetitive. The levels themselves, design-wise, also end up getting repetitive, with hallways and long areas looking exactly the same as the ones that just ended up passing. There are themed levels like the graveyard and subway station, but once you've completed the first few rooms, it pretty much just all ends up blending together. Each of the stages takes about 20 to 30 minutes to complete, and by the time I ended up getting to the end of most of them, I was begging for the level to end so I could hopefully get a change of scenery and maybe even change of ghost by the time I actually finally completed each stage. While the game is very multiplayer heavy, wanting you to play with your friends, unfortunately the lack of online, as well as just being able to have 4 PS4 controllers and 4 friends at the same time at your place, probably isn't going to happen all that often, but if you're able to get a group together, I'm sure it's a lot more fun. Playing through it single player, while it wasn't really the worst experience, it did drag more so than it probably would if I was playing the game along with friends. If you do decide to play the game single player, beware that the AI that's going to be joining you is barely passable. I mean, sometimes they shoot, sometimes they use their proton beam, and sometimes they revive you. For the most part though, they barely do anything, and they can't even bust the bigger ghost or even pick up ghost traps once a ghost has been captured. I had a few instances where they did revive me quite often. If I dropped during the course of battle, they would instantly pick me back up. One of the things that makes the game actually really easy is the fact you have unlimited revivals and no choice in difficulties, so the game is actually really easy overall to play through. But other times when I ended up dropping in battle, they just stood there. They wouldn't pick me up at all. In fact, sometimes they would defeat all the rest of the ghosts that were around, and then just stood there in a circle. Like, get in the basic formation, and then just stare at me and never pick me up. And unless they picked me up, I wouldn't have been able to continue. Thankfully, if you have a second controller, there is drop in and drop out. So if you have a second PS4 controller, you can turn that on in order to revive you if you end up running in this particular glitch. There's also a load previous checkpoint, so you don't have to restart the entire level if something like this ends up happening and you only have one controller at your disposal. Still, it's unacceptable at any cost for this to end up happening. Their first and main goal should be to bring you back if you end up dropping, especially if there's no other enemies currently on the screen. Speaking of glitches, besides just the bad AI and the occasional freezing and stuttering, I also had a problem where some enemies would get stuck in objects. One of the boss characters in particular ended up getting stuck inside of a thing, and I was unable to actually fight them. There was basically an invisible wall around them. I was unable to attack them, they were unable to attack me, and I had to reload the previous checkpoint in order to kind of reset everything and try again. Once you start having these minor issues, bad AI, and repetitiveness, it starts to weigh on you pretty quickly with this game. Graphically, the game's passable. The isometric view being far out, of course, doesn't let you see a lot of the key details, but there's nothing particularly good or bad really in that department. Musically though, they did license the Ghostbusters music theme, so you will be hearing that quite often at the level selection screen and various times throughout the main plot. The background music, though, for the levels was actually done by Grant Kirkhope of Banjo-Kazooie fame and various other Rare projects. But unfortunately, it feels like he kind of phoned this in, as it really isn't anything spectacular to listen to, and I was actually surprised when I saw his name in the credits. Completing the main game took me about 4.5 to 5 hours, and once you do so, you can go back and get any of the collectibles that you ended up missing, as there are 4 collectibles in all of the main stages of the game, unlocking you some alternate colors for your main characters. There's also an index of all of the creatures in the game. Once you see a new one, you'll end up getting a new entry there, so you can kind of look at it, some information, and rotate the model around if you really want to do such a thing. Also completing the game, you will get the remix levels, and there are 4 remix stages, adding about another hour or so of gameplay total. Overall, the game is not inherently bad. It's kind of monotonous and boring, and definitely one that you'll want to play with friends, but with the lack of online, that makes it even tougher in order to do so. Factor in the poor AI if you are playing by yourself or even just with one friend, along with some of the glitches and other bugs that I ran into, ended up making this not nearly as good of an experience as I was expecting, and I honestly wasn't expecting much from this title at all. With all that aside though, I could recommend the game if it wasn't for the price tag. With the $50 price tag for this release, it's another example of Activision gouging their fan base, or gouging fans of a particular license. They did it back in November of last year with Snoopy for the new Peanuts movie. They did it back in May for TMNT Mutants in Manhattan, which honestly was an okay game had it been a $20 or $15 release. And honestly, the same can be said for this. If this was a download game for only $15 or $20, I could at least recommend it for a fun multiplayer experience with your friends. But a $50 overall price tag for a game that's just mediocre at best, and then when you factor in bugs and glitching and freezing and just poor AI, it's impossible for me to really say, hey, go out and pick up the game. So in the end though, I'm going to be giving Ghostbusters on the PlayStation 4 a 4 out of 10. So anyway guys, that will wrap up this review. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.